At 2 o'clock in the morning, inside Seoul's most exclusive private estate, billionaire Kang Min-jun stepped into his locked master study and caught his quiet night housekeeper holding a razor-sharp carving scalpel against his family's $4 million wooden chest. She didn't run. She didn't drop the blade. She simply froze under the warm amber glow of the desk lamp, her breathing steady, her eyes calm. Min-jun grabbed her wrist, his voice cold enough to freeze the midnight air. He was seconds away from calling security to have her arrested for art theft. But as he forced her hand open, his grip went completely slack. In her palm was a hand-carved steel chisel, and on its wooden handle was a small, hand-engraved emblem, a dual butterfly mark. It was the exact same mark left on his mother's suicide note 20 years ago. Min-jun stared at the quiet maid standing in the shadows of his family's ancestral home, and for the first time in 5 years, his heart hammered against his chest. "Who gave you this tool?" he whispered. The maid met his eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "The man your family destroyed." Her name was Eun-soo. To the rest of the staff at the Bukchon Hanok estate, she was just the new temporary housekeeper, a quiet 31-year-old woman who wore plain dark knits, kept her dark hair tied in a simple bun, and spent her shifts wiping down stone tiles and polishing heavy oak doors. She was paid $10 an hour. She was invisible, and that was exactly how she wanted it. No one in the house knew that Eun-soo wasn't a maid at all. She was one of the nation's most gifted master antique furniture restorers. 3 weeks ago, when Kang Heritage Group announced that the famous ancestral mansion in Bukchon Village was being put up for private sale, Eun-soo knew her time was running out. Somewhere inside that estate was a missing craftsman journal that belonged to her late father, Han Seong-jin. 20 years ago, her father had been the estate's head artisan. But overnight, he was accused of forging priceless foundation artwork, stripped of his reputation, and driven into bankruptcy. He died in obscurity, leaving Eun-soo with nothing but a chest of his old tools and a lingering stain on her family name. Eun-soo took the night maid job for one reason: to search the estate's locked archives and clear her father's name. But as she wiped away decades of dust, she noticed something that broke her heart. The estate's priceless antique furniture, handcrafted pine cabinets, rosewood desks, and carved altar tables were decaying from years of neglect. Unable to stand by and watch history turn to rot, Eun-soo began bringing her father's specialized tools in her cleaning cart every night. While the master of the house was away, she silently repaired the damaged heirlooms under the cover of darkness. She believed no one would ever notice. She was wrong. Kang Min-jun ran his fingers along the edge of the century-old pine wardrobe in his study. Just 2 days ago, a visible 3-inch fracture ran down the center panel, caused by humidity changes in the Hanok. He had already planned to write the piece off as damaged goods before the property auction. Yet today, the crack was gone. The wood didn't just look repaired. It had been seamlessly joined using ancient, seed-based natural resins and polished with wild walnut oil, a costly, traditional technique that only a handful of senior master artisans in South Korea even knew how to execute. Min-jun called his corporate assistant, Secretary Yoon, into the study. "Did you hire an outside restoration team from the museum without telling me?" Min-jun asked, his voice sharp. "No, Director Kang," Yoon replied, checking his tablet. "The estate sale preparations are strictly confidential. No conservators have been granted access to the main residence." Min-jun's eyes narrowed. Someone was sneaking into his private quarters at night. Someone who possessed elite artistic skill, yet refused to take credit for work worth tens of thousands of dollars. That night, Min-jun did something he hadn't done in months. Instead of returning to his penthouse apartment in Gangnam, he stayed at the Bukchon estate. He turned off the lights in his master study, sat back in his dark armchair, and waited. At 1:45 a.m., the heavy wooden door creaked open. A slender silhouette slipped inside, holding a small copper lantern in one hand and a soft cloth roll in the other. Min-jun stayed in the shadows, watching silently as the maid dropped to her knees before the damaged rosewood chest. He expected her to search his drawers for money or corporate titles. Instead, She unrolled a set of razor-sharp chisels, took out a small jar of amber lacquer, and began to work on the damaged wood with the gentle, rhythmic precision of a surgeon. When Min-jun grabbed her wrist, he expected panic. He expected excuses. Instead, he found himself staring into the eyes of a woman whose steady gaze held no guilt, only an intense, melancholy defiance. "Explain what you're doing in a locked study with an unregistered weapon," Min-jun demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "I am restoring what your neglect is destroying," Eun-soo answered calmly, without pulling her arm away. "This rosewood chest was commissioned by your grandfather in 1928. If the humidity seeps into the lower joinery for another week, the base frame will collapse. You are preparing to sell this house for $80 million, yet you're letting its soul rot in the dark." Min-jun's chest tightened. He wanted to call security. He wanted to throw her off the property. But as he stood over her, something extraordinary happened. For 5 years, Min-jun had suffered from severe, non-responsive psychological insomnia. Ever since the tragic scandal that claimed his childhood home and drove his mother away, his mind refused to shut down. He survived on 2 hours of fragmented sleep a night, relying on heavy prescription medication that barely dulled his exhaustion. Yet as Eun-soo sat on the hardwood floor, returning to her work with calm, measured movements, the rhythmic scrape of her sanding block filled the quiet study. The scent of wild walnut oil and raw pine filled the room. Min-jun's pulse began to slow. The perpetual fog behind his eyes began to lift. He stepped back, sinking into the leather armchair behind his desk, intending to watch her every move until sunrise. 10 minutes later, Min-jun's eyes closed. For the first time in 5 years, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Min-jun opened his eyes, pale gray sunlight was streaming through the traditional paper window screens. He sat up abruptly. The study was empty. On the desk beside his elbow sat a warm, steaming cup of roasted barley tea and a small handwritten note on plain parchment paper. "The rosewood base is sealed. Do not touch the lower drawer for 12 hours while the lacquer cures." Min-jun looked at his watch. He had slept uninterrupted for 6 straight hours. And Secretary Yoon arrived at 7 in the morning with corporate budget reports. He stopped dead in his tracks. For the first time in years, his boss didn't look like a walking ghost. The dark hollows beneath Min-jun's eyes were visibly softened. "Director Kang, did you sleep?" Yoon asked in disbelief. Min-jun ignored the question, his eyes fixed on the perfectly restored rosewood chest. "Find out everything you can about the night housekeeper," Han Eun-soo, "but do it quietly. My uncle must not know." That afternoon, Min-jun summoned Eun-soo to the central courtyard. Instead of handing her a termination notice, he laid a sleek leather-bound contract on the teak table between them. "You broke into a private room. You touched multi-million-dollar estate assets without authorization," Min-jun said, his voice measured. "I could have you blacklisted from every restoration house in the country." Eun-soo kept her head high. "Then why haven't you called the police?" Min-jun leaned forward, his dark eyes locked onto hers. "Because you fixed in 3 hours what 3 museum conservators said was impossible. Here is my offer. You will continue your night shifts. You will restore every damaged piece of furniture in the inner sanctuary before the final auction. In return, I will double your salary, keep your identity hidden from the board, and grant you full access to the estate's private historical archives." Eun-soo's heart skipped a beat. The private archives were where her father's missing papers were hidden. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Min-jun didn't answer right away. He couldn't tell her that her presence was the only thing that turned off the noise in his head. "Because this house is full of lies," he said coldly. "And I want to know why a maid knows its secrets better than I do." The quiet arrangement between the CEO and the night maid began in silence, but the peace did not last. 4 days later, a long black luxury sedan pulled into the traditional gravel courtyard of the Bukchon estate. Out stepped Executive Director Kang Tae-jin, Min-jun's paternal uncle, and the head of the Kang Cultural Foundation. Tae-jin was a powerful, silver-haired executive in a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit. To the public, he was a generous patron of Korean arts and a loving uncle who had stepped in to help guide the corporate foundation after his sister-in-law's tragic demise 20 years ago. But as Tae-jin walked through the main hall, his eyes were sharp, calculating, and cold. "Min-jun," Tae-jin said, throwing a set of property valuation documents onto the study table. "The European art conglomerate has increased their bid for the estate to $85 million. The buyer wants the entire Hanok demolished to build a modern luxury cultural center. We need to sign the transfer deeds by the end of the month." Min-jun didn't touch the papers. "This is our ancestral home, uncle. The international heritage audit isn't complete yet. Why the rush to sell?" Tae-jin's smile stiffened for a fraction of a second. "The foundation needs liquid capital. Keeping this old pile of timber running costs millions a year. Besides, this house holds too many painful memories for you. Your mother's scandal." From the dark hallway outside the study door, Eun-soo stood holding a tray of tea, her knuckles white against the wood. She watched Tae-jin carefully. Whenever her father's name or the estate archives were mentioned, Tae-jin's right hand twitched, his signet ring turning against his finger. Why was a corporate director so desperate to demolish a historic mansion before an international audit closed? That night, while Tae-jin was reviewing legal files in the estate's reception hall, Eun-soo slipped into the deep subterranean storage vault beneath the main study. Using her father's old blueprint sketches, she counted the stone pillars along the eastern wall. 7 pillars, 3 steps right, 2 steps left. She pressed her palm against a heavy cedar wall panel. It didn't budge. But when she ran her thumb along the bottom molding, her scar, the faint line on her left index finger left by her father's chisel years ago, felt a subtle seam in the wood. It was a hidden double mortise lock, built using traditional 19th century joinery methods. A lock that required no metal key. It required a craftsman's hand. With a soft wooden click, the hidden panel shifted outward. Inside the narrow wall cavity lay a dusty leather-bound sketchbook wrapped in waxed silk, alongside a stack of faded yellowed letters sealed with dried red wax. Eun-soo's hands trembled as she pulled the sketchbook into the lantern light. On the cover, written in strong, familiar brushstrokes, was her father's name, Han Seong-jin, master craftsman. She opened the journal. Page after page contained intricate architectural drawings of the Bukchon estate, detailed lists of foundation restoration works from 2006, and meticulous financial logs. But as Eun-soo turned to the final entries, her breath caught in her throat. Tucked inside the back cover were 3 airmail envelopes addressed to a small residential village in Provence, France. The letters were not written by her father. They were written by Yoon Ki-won, Kang Min-jun's mother. Eun-soo's heart hammered against her ribs as she read the panicked, hurried handwriting from 20 years ago. "Seong-jin, thank you for securing my escape route. Tae-jin discovered the foundation's off-book accounts. He threatened to destroy my son if I exposed his embezzlement. If I vanish, he will tell the press I took my own life in shame. Please protect Min-jun. Hide the real restoration deeds inside the Hanok inner wall." Eun-soo stood frozen in the cold subterranean room. Min-jun's mother hadn't taken her own life 20 years ago. She had been extorted and forced into exile by director Tae-jin to cover up his stolen millions. And Eun-soo's father hadn't committed art forgery. He had helped a desperate mother escape a ruthless corporate predator, paying for it with his own name and reputation. "What are you holding?" Eun-soo spun around. Min-jun was standing at the top of the stone vault stairs, his face shrouded in shadow. He stepped down into the dimly lit vault, his eyes fixed on the yellowed letters in her hand. Eun-soo didn't hide them. She held the letters out to him, her voice quiet but unyielding. "For 20 years, you believed your mother abandoned you in shame," Eun-soo said softly. "Read this, and learn the truth about the family you are trying so hard to protect." Min-jun read his mother's letters under the harsh glow of the vault lantern. His hand shook so violently that the delicate parchment rattled in the quiet air. Page after page, His mother's frantic words shattered 2 decades of built-up grief, anger, and self-loathing. She hadn't left because she didn't love him. She had left to keep him alive. Min-jun looked up at Eun-soo, his chest heaving, his eyes bloodshot with sudden, overwhelming emotion. "Your father, Han Seong-jin," Min-jun whispered, the name tasting like ash on his tongue. "He was the one who helped her." "My father was branded a criminal and a fraud by your family's foundation," Eun-soo said, a single tear cutting through the dust on her cheek. "My uncle abandoned me because of the scandal. I spent 10 years hiding my real name just to earn a living as a restorer, but my father died protecting your mother." Before Min-jun could answer, the heavy wooden security gate at the top of the vault stairs slammed shut with a metallic bang. The sound of footsteps echoed from the upper hallway. Director Tae-jin stood on the upper landing, flanked by 2 security officers from the foundation. He looked down into the stone vault, his polite executive smile replaced by a cold, sharp sneer. "I wondered why the night housekeeper was spending so much time in the master's private quarters," Tae-jin said smoothly, stepping down the stairs. "Han Eun-soo, I should have recognized those stubborn eyes the moment you walked into this house. You're Seong-jin's daughter." Tae-jin gestured to the security officers. "It seems we have an intruder who has stolen confidential corporate artifacts from the estate archives. Call the Gangnam Police Department immediately." "Stand down," Min-jun's voice boomed through the stone room, cold, quiet, and terrifying. He stepped directly in front of Eun-soo, shielding her with his tall frame. "Uncle," Min-jun said, his eyes burning with absolute disgust. "The police are coming, but they aren't coming for her." Tae-jin's eyes narrowed, but his composure did not break. He was a veteran corporate player who had controlled the board for 2 decades. "Min-jun, don't be naive," Tae-jin said softly, taking a step closer. "You're letting grief manipulate you. That girl is the daughter of a convicted fraudster. Whatever fairy tales she has planted in your head mean nothing in a court of law. The foundation board owns this estate. The sale closes in 48 hours. "The board owns nothing," Eun-soo spoke up, stepping out from behind Min-jun. She pulled a small, heavy bronze cylinder from her leather tool roll, an item recovered from the hidden wall compartment, alongside her father's journal. "This is the original 1996 Bukchon Cultural Land Trust deed," Eun-soo declared, holding the document high. "My father didn't just restore this mansion. He registered the estate under a joint cultural trust that legally prevents the property from ever being sold or demolished without the unanimous consent of the head restorer's direct heir." Tae-jin's face drained of all color. His hand twitched violently against his signet ring. "That deed is a fake," Tae-jin barked, turning to his guards. "Seize those papers." "Touch her, and you'll spend the rest of your life in a state penitentiary," Min-jun commanded. Min-jun pulled out his phone and made a single call to Secretary Yoon. "Yoon, freeze all international asset transfers for the Kang Cultural Foundation. Contact the prosecutor's office and order a forensic audit on every off-book bank account registered to Director Kang Tae-jin over the last 20 years. We hold the original deeds." Tae-jin backed away, his calm facade shattering into desperate rage. "You fool! You're destroying your own family name for a maid." "No," Min-jun answered, holding Eun-soo's gaze. "I'm restoring it." 48 hours later, heavy autumn rain lashed against the wooden roof tiles of the Bukchon Hanok. Inside the main reception room, under the grand timber arches, the entire emergency board of the Kang Heritage Group had assembled alongside international heritage auditors and legal prosecutors. At the head of the long oak table sat Executive Director Tae-jin, flanked by his corporate lawyers, making one final desperate attempt to retain control of the foundation. "Members of the board," Tae-jin announced loudly over the rain. These allegations are nothing more than fabricated rumors started by a disgraced former employee's daughter, attempting to extort our corporate group. The room fell silent as the heavy sliding doors opened. Kang Min-jun walked into the boardroom, but he was not alone. Beside him walked Eun-soo, dressed not in a housekeeper's apron, but in a refined dark navy silk suit, carrying a wooden display case. She set the case in the center of the table and opened it before the board. Inside lay two objects, the 100-year-old pine chest and a set of chemical laboratory reports from the National Cultural Heritage Institute. Director Tae-jin claims my father forged the foundation's core collection 20 years ago, Eun-soo said, her clear voice carrying across the silent room. If that were true, the lacquer used on these pieces would contain modern synthetic solvents. She pointed to the microscopic test results on the screen. Chemical analysis proves that every heirloom in this house was restored using organic wild walnut oil and seed resin formulated exclusively by my father, Han Seong-jin, and beneath the lower joint of this chest. She turned the antique wooden frame toward the lead prosecutor. Is the dual butterfly mark. One half was carved by Han Seong-jin. The other half was carved by Yoon Ki-won director Min-jun's mother. They signed every piece together to create a secret ledger of the foundation's core collection 20 years ago, Eun-soo said, her clear voice carrying across the silent room. If that were true, the lacquer used on these pieces would contain modern synthetic solvents. She pointed to the microscopic test results on the screen. Chemical analysis proves that every heirloom in this house was restored using organic wild walnut oil and seed resin formulated exclusively by my father, Han Seong-jin, and beneath the lower joint of this chest. She turned the antique wooden frame toward the lead prosecutor. Is the dual butterfly mark. One half was carved by Han Seong-jin. The other half was carved by Yoon Ki-won director Min-jun's mother. They signed every piece together to create a secret ledger of the foundation's true assets before Director Tae-jin embezzled $40 million into private European accounts. Secretary Yoon stepped forward, handing a thick binder of verified wire transfer receipts to the prosecutor. We traced the monthly wire transfers from Director Tae-jin's shell companies in Lyon, France, Yoon reported, paid directly to monitor and silence Yoon Ki-won in exile. Tae-jin stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He opened his mouth to speak, to scream, to deny, but as he looked at the stone-faced prosecutors and the disgusted expressions of the board members, he realized it was over. The lies that had sustained his corporate empire for 20 years had finally collapsed under the light of the truth. Two prosecution officers stepped forward, pulling iron handcuffs from their coats. As Tae-jin was led out of the Bukchon Hanok into the pouring rain, he did not look at the board. He looked at Eun-soo, the quiet maid he had underestimated, who had dismantled his legacy with a carving blade and an old journal. 3 months later, the crisp cold of late autumn had turned into a gentle early winter light over Seoul. The news of the scandal had rocked the corporate world, but the outcome brought national celebration. The court officially cleared Han Seong-jin's name, restoring his status as a legendary national master craftsman. Kang Heritage Group officially canceled the sale of the Bukchon Hanok. Instead, Min-jun stepped down from commercial real estate development and launched the Seong-jin Heritage Preservation Center, a public trust dedicated to restoring traditional Korean arts. And at the head of the center, appointed as master restorer, was Han Eun-soo. Late one afternoon, amber sunlight streamed through the courtyard of the restored estate. Min-jun walked along the wooden veranda, holding 2 warm cups of roasted barley tea. He wore a simple dark wool knit sweater, looking relaxed, healthy, and entirely at peace. He walked into the master study, the very room where he had caught a quiet maid with a carving blade 3 months ago. Eun-soo was sitting at the central desk, carefully applying a fresh layer of amber lacquer to an antique tea tray. Min-jun set the cup down beside her work, stepping behind her to watch her delicate, precise hands move across the dark pine wood. Secretary Yoon said the International Heritage Delegation loved the new restoration exhibition. Min-jun said softly, his voice full of warmth. Eun-soo looked up, smiling softly. They said the house feels alive again. Min-jun leaned against the desk, his eyes resting on her face with quiet devotion. It wasn't the house that was dead, Eun-soo, he whispered softly. It was me. He reached out, his long fingers gently sliding over hers, resting on the quiet scar on her left index finger. My mother called from France this morning, Min-jun said, his voice thick with emotion. She's flying back to Seoul next week. She wants to see the Hanok, and she wants to meet the master artisan who saved our home. Eun-soo felt a soft tear slip down her cheek, but for the first time in 20 years, it was not a tear of grief. It was a tear of profound, complete healing. She turned her palm up, holding Min-jun's hand tightly under the warm lantern light of the study. The estate was no longer a place of hidden grief or rigid class barriers. It was no longer a cage of painful memories. It was home. And as the sun set over the historic roofs of Bukchon, casting a golden light across the dark pine floors, two broken souls who had met in the darkness of midnight stood together in the light, finally whole, finally peaceful, and bound by a love that no lie could ever tear apart.